School Days, a name that has become synonymous with betrayal, violence, and heartache in the anime world. An anime that starts with innocent high school romance, but takes a dark and disturbing turn as its characters are forced to confront the consequences of their actions. School Days is one of those anime that sticks with you long after the final episode, either because you're still processing what you saw or because it left you with a sense of dread that lingers. Today, we'll dive into the entire story from beginning to end, analyze the characters in depth, unpack the deeper themes that make it so unsettling, and discuss why this anime isn't for everyone. Let's begin. School Days is adapted from a visual novel that was released in 2005 by Overflow. It was then adapted into a 12-episode anime series in 2007. At first glance, it seems like your typical high school romance. Makoto Itu, the protagonist, finds himself caught in a love triangle with two girls, Kotonoha Katsura, a shy and reserved girl, and Sekai Sayonji, a more outgoing, boisterous classmate. The premise itself feels familiar. Many anime explore similar love triangles, from classic harem shows to romantic comedies. Yet, School Days isn't interested in taking the safe, predictable route. From the very first episode, it builds tension and emotional stakes that gradually escalate into something far darker. The first few episodes are characterized by a playful, somewhat innocent tone. Makoto is initially introduced as a typical high school boy who's caught up in the excitement of his newfound feelings for Kotonoha, while Sekai, the more outgoing of the two girls, encourages him to pursue Kotonoha, all while giving him advice on how to handle relationships. However, this seemingly innocent beginning sets the stage for much darker, more disturbing events. As the anime progresses, the relationships between the characters become increasingly toxic, and emotions that once seemed harmless begin to spiral out of control. Makoto's indecisiveness is a key driving force of the story. On the surface, he's a typical confused high schooler who can't decide which girl to pursue. But as his relationships with Kotonoha and Sekai deepen, it becomes clear that his inability to commit is not merely a teenage dilemma, it's a sign of deeper emotional irresponsibility. The anime in many ways asks the question, what happens when a person refuses to make decisions, or worse, makes decisions without understanding the full consequences? And how does the fallout affect not just the person making those choices, but everyone around them? Let's start by examining the three central characters in greater detail. First up is Makoto Itu. He's not the stereotypical bad boy, nor is he the perfect gentleman. He's a complicated mess of contradictions. On one hand, he's charming and seemingly well-meaning, but on the other hand, he's emotionally distant and unwilling to confront the consequences of his actions. Throughout the series, Makoto's relationships are defined by his inability to fully commit to one person, and as a result, he ends up betraying both Kotonoha and Sekai. His actions, or lack thereof, highlight the theme of emotional negligence. In a sense, Makoto is a reflection of how people can be swept up in desire and neglect the feelings of others. His indecision and selfishness eventually lead to a chaotic spiral where no one, including himself, escapes unscathed. Next we have Kotonoha Katsura, who is an interesting foil to Makoto's character. Kotonoha is the epitome of innocence and vulnerability. She's soft-spoken, graceful, and deeply devoted to Makoto. Her love for him is genuine, and she believes that their relationship will grow into something meaningful. However, Kotonoha's innocence becomes her downfall. She places her emotional well-being in the hands of someone who is unworthy of her love. Her desperation for Makoto's affection causes her to overlook his flaws, and as his actions become more erratic and hurtful, Kotonoha finds herself unable to escape the toxic relationship she's invested in. She becomes increasingly emotionally unstable as she is pushed to her limits, revealing the fragility of idealized love. Finally, we have Sekai Sayonji, the character who arguably drives much of the show's drama. On the surface, Sekai seems to be the best friend who's there to help Kotonoha and give Makoto advice. But as we peel back the layers, we discover a much more complex character. Sekai is impulsive, driven by her own emotions and desires. Unlike Kotonoha, Sekai is unafraid to act on her feelings, and this makes her a dangerous player in the emotional chess game between her, Makoto, and Kotonoha. She starts off as a somewhat sympathetic character, but as her obsession with Makoto grows, so does her capacity for manipulation. Sekai represents the darker, more selfish side of love, and her actions highlight the consequences of emotional impulse and manipulation. Like Makoto, Sekai is unable to foresee the damage her actions cause, and in her pursuit of love, she becomes just as toxic as the person she initially sought to help. As we move deeper into the story, we see the love triangle begin to evolve in ways that are both dramatic and destructive. At first, the relationship between Makoto and Kotonoha appears to be growing stronger, but things take a turn when Sekai, who has secretly developed feelings for Makoto, starts to manipulate the situation to her advantage. Makoto, unsure of how to handle his emotions, ends up betraying Kotonoha by sleeping with Sekai. This marks the beginning of the end for all three characters. The fallout from this betrayal is swift and brutal. Kotonoha's world shatters when she discovers that Makoto, the person she believed loved her, has been sleeping with Sekai. The emotional toll this takes on Kotonoha is profound. She goes from being a hopeful, innocent girl in love to a broken, paranoid woman who can't escape the pain of being betrayed. The anime doesn't pull any punches when it comes to showing the devastation that emotional betrayal can cause. Kotonoha's emotional breakdown is one of the most gut-wrenching moments in the series, as we witness her slow descent into madness. At the same time, Sekai becomes more and more entangled in her own emotional chaos. Initially, she may seem like the cool character who understands the complexities of relationships, but her jealousy and obsession with Makoto cloud her judgment. As the series progresses, Sekai's desperation to keep Makoto to herself leads her to manipulate and lie in increasingly harmful ways. But unlike Kotonoha, Sekai is fully aware of the emotional damage she's causing, yet she continues down this destructive path. The final episodes of School Days are an escalation of everything that came before. We've seen the cracks form in the relationships, the manipulation, the betrayal, but nothing could prepare us for how far things go. The tension that's been slowly building throughout the series comes to a head in the final episodes, which become a whirlwind of emotional intensity and chaos. What initially felt like a series of somewhat awkward and dramatic moments between Makoto, Sekai and Kotonoha transforms into a violent and unsettling climax. As the relationships between the characters continue to spiral, the final confrontation feels almost inevitable. Sekai, who has increasingly grown obsessed with Makoto, starts to push him to the edge, revealing just how deeply her feelings have consumed her. Her actions are desperate, her behavior reckless, but she is driven by an overwhelming need to hold on to Makoto, to make him hers at any cost. Meanwhile, Kotonoha, who has already been emotionally shattered by Makoto's betrayal, begins to unravel completely. Her once serene demeanor fades, replaced by a manic obsession to reclaim the love she believes she's lost. Both women become emotionally unstable, and their interactions with Makoto only deepen the damage already done. Makoto, the person at the center of all this destruction, is still as emotionally detached as ever. He's not incapable of seeing the consequences of his actions, but his ability to empathize or truly comprehend the magnitude of what he's done is lacking. He continues to float through the events around him, uncertain and detached, only concerned with his own desires and immediate gratification. This detachment is both a key element of his character and a critical factor in the downfall of everyone involved. He becomes like a passive observer of his own life, incapable of truly connecting with either Kotonoha or Sekai, and this emotional neglect is what propels the series toward its inevitable and violent conclusion. In the final episodes, the confrontation between Sekai, Kotonoha, and Makoto comes to a head. After the explosive emotional conflict between the characters, Makoto's actions culminate in a shocking, violent outburst. The tension between Sekai and Kotonoha reaches its boiling point when Sekai confronts Kotonoha about Makoto. This moment doesn't just reflect the toxic nature of their rivalry, it also symbolizes how both girls have become consumed by their emotions, unable to think rationally or see beyond their feelings. Sekai, once the confident and bold character, becomes as fragile as Kotonoha in her pursuit of validation from Makoto. Ultimately, the violent culmination of their actions is not just the result of a physical altercation, it's a reflection of the emotional devastation each character has endured. Kotonoha's psychological breakdown reaches its peak when she is faced with the cruel truth of Makoto's betrayal, not just with Sekai, but with how he has treated both of them throughout the entire series. She, who once believed that love was pure and mutual, is now forced to confront the idea that love can be destructive and toxic. Sekai, who tried to manipulate and control the situation in her favor, faces the consequences of her emotional instability and selfishness. The ending of School Days is nothing short of shocking. The final act of violence is quick, brutal, and unexpected, leaving the viewer stunned in disbelief. Without giving away too much, the final moments represent the culmination of everything that has gone wrong in these characters' lives. The emotional wreckage left behind is staggering. Makoto's journey ends in the most violent way possible, and the true cost of his selfishness is revealed in the most shocking of manners. This is not just a tragedy, it's a psychological horror, a moment where the consequences of their actions are laid bare in the most brutal of ways. After the final act, we are left with nothing but silence and emptiness. The story doesn't offer redemption or closure for the characters. There is no cathartic release, no resolution to the emotional turmoil. Instead, we are left with a haunting reminder of how far things can spiral when we allow ourselves to be consumed by our emotions. School Days doesn't give us the comfort of a neatly wrapped up ending. It leaves the aftermath lingering, forcing the audience to process the destruction that has occurred. The final scene in particular is both chilling and final. The show ends without offering any kind of hope for the characters. It leaves us with a powerful, almost unsettling sense of closure. There's no coming back from this. The finality of the events and the violence of the climax make it clear. School Days is not just a story of a love triangle gone wrong. It's a warning about obsession, emotional irresponsibility, and the catastrophic consequences of manipulation, neglect, and betrayal. In many ways, the shocking and disturbing nature of School Days is what makes it stand out in the anime landscape. It doesn't offer easy resolutions or sugar-coated depictions of love. It shows the ugly, painful reality of what happens when we let our emotions govern our actions. The final moments of the show are unforgettable, not just because of their shock value, but because they force the viewer to reckon with the emotional consequences of the characters' decisions. School Days is not merely a story about a love triangle gone wrong. At its core, It explores some of the darkest aspects of human nature: obsession, betrayal, emotional neglect, and the dangers of romanticizing toxic relationships. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities that we often avoid in real life. The series doesn't just present a series of events, it asks us to examine the emotional cost of those events and reflect on the consequences of living in a world governed by selfish desires and unspoken expectations. It challenges the conventions of the romance genre and uses its characters to paint a stark picture of how quickly things can go awry when people refuse to understand and respect each other's emotions. One of the key themes of School Days is the destructive nature of emotional neglect and indecision. Makoto Itu, as the central character, represents the consequences of failing to acknowledge the emotional complexity of relationships. Early in the series, Makoto seems harmless. He's simply a guy trying to figure out his feelings for two girls. But as the story unfolds, it becomes clear that Makoto is deeply selfish and emotionally irresponsible. His inability to commit to either Kotonoha or Sekai, combined with his failure to communicate his feelings, sets off a chain of events that spirals into chaos. Instead of dealing with his emotions honestly and directly, Makoto leads the two girls on, causing emotional distress for both of them. Makoto's actions showcase the devastating impact of emotional neglect. His lack of regard for Kotonoha's feelings and his careless treatment of Sekai turn what could have been a simple love triangle into something much darker. He fails to recognize the emotional burden he's placing on both girls, and as the story progresses, he continues to act out of selfish desire, without any understanding of the emotional pain he's causing. His indifference to their feelings ultimately leads to tragic consequences. In this way, School Days serves as a cautionary tale about how our actions, when motivated by selfishness or indecision, can have irreversible effects on the people around us. The second major theme is obsession, and more specifically the destructive power of obsessive love. Kotonoha's character arc represents the dangers of placing all your emotional energy into a single person. She enters into a relationship with Makoto believing that love is pure, mutual, and all-encompassing. However, as the series progresses, Kotonoha becomes increasingly obsessed with Makoto. Her love for him turns from admiration and devotion to a possessive need to have him to herself. She becomes emotionally unstable when she realizes that her idealized image of love is not only shattered, but completely disregarded by Makoto, who is no longer emotionally invested in her. Similarly, Sekai also falls into a pattern of obsession, though in a different way. Her obsession stems not from a single-minded devotion to Makoto, but from the desire to win him for herself. After encouraging Makoto to be with Kotonoha, Sekai finds herself falling for him and becomes consumed by her jealousy and insecurity. She manipulates the situation to ensure that Makoto remains involved with her, but as her feelings intensify, so does her emotional volatility. Sekai's obsession with Makoto, paired with her tendency to act on impulse, drives much of the drama in the series. She doesn't recognize how her behavior mirrors Makoto's own lack of emotional responsibility. Both characters are swept up in their own desires, unable to stop and consider the consequences of their actions until it's far too late. Another key theme explored in School Days is emotional manipulation. Both Sekai and Kotonoha, in their own ways, manipulate Makoto and each other. Sekai, as the more outwardly assertive character, is often the one who actively manipulates Makoto's emotions, using his indecision to her advantage. At first, her actions seem like they come from a place of concern for Kotonoha, but as her feelings for Makoto grow, she begins to manipulate the situation to get what she wants, him, Sekai's manipulations aren't just emotional, they're also psychological. She uses guilt, frustration, and even anger to control the situation and keep Makoto close to her. It's clear that Sekai understands the darker sides of love and is willing to use those manipulative tactics to her advantage, which makes her just as morally grey as Makoto. On the other hand, Kotonoha's manipulation is more passive. She tries to regain control over her relationship with Makoto by becoming increasingly obsessive and possessive. Her emotional breakdowns and her inability to let go of Makoto become a form of manipulation in itself, as she forces him to confront the reality of her feelings for him. But unlike Sekai, Kotonoha's manipulation is born from desperation. She wants Makoto to feel guilty for his actions, and she attempts to emotionally corner him into realizing the depth of her love. It's a tragic form of manipulation because it comes from a place of vulnerability and emotional need, not malice. School Days also delves deeply into the concept of emotional dependency. All three characters, Makoto, Kotonoha, and Sekai, become emotionally dependent on each other, creating a toxic feedback loop. Kotonoha depends on Makoto's affection to define her sense of self-worth, while Sekai depends on Makoto's attention to fill the emotional void left by her own insecurities. Meanwhile, Makoto's need for attention and validation from both girls feeds into his selfish and inconsiderate behaviour. The characters' dependence on each other to fulfill emotional needs is a key part of why their relationships deteriorate. There's no healthy communication or emotional independence among them, only a mutual reliance on each other to satisfy personal desires, which only exacerbates the chaos. Perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of School Days is its exploration of how easily toxic relationships can form when people fail to communicate their feelings or understand each other's boundaries. Throughout the series, the characters make one bad decision after another, and they often refuse to acknowledge the emotional cost of those decisions. Makoto's refusal to confront the emotional realities of his relationships, Sekai's manipulations, and Kotonoha's obsessive need to hold on to something that is no longer there create a perfect storm of emotional dysfunction. This toxic web of manipulation, obsession, and neglect ultimately leads to their undoing. Ultimately, School Days presents a grim view of relationships, showing us the consequences of living in a world where emotions are not dealt with honestly or responsibly. It's a show that refuses to sugarcoat the reality of love and human connection. The characters may have started off with good intentions, but their inability to navigate the complexities of their emotions, combined with their selfishness, insecurity, and desire for validation, leads to a tragic end. The anime forces the viewer to ask themselves, what happens when we prioritize our own desires over the well-being of others? What happens when we fail to communicate and truly understand the people we claim to love? By examining these themes, School Days pushes us to confront uncomfortable truths about relationships. It's an exploration of the darker, less discussed aspects of human nature: obsession, manipulation, emotional neglect, and emotional dependence. And it's these very themes that make School Days such a powerful and memorable series. It's not just a story about a love triangle gone wrong. It's a reflection of the destructive power of our emotions when we fail to control them. School Days is one of those anime that you either love or hate. It's a series that demands your attention, but at the same time, it can be deeply unsettling for a lot of viewers. The show doesn't offer the comforting, predictable conclusions that many people expect from a high school romance, and that is, in itself, part of its brilliance. However, it's also what makes School Days such a polarizing experience. It's a show that doesn't cater to the typical anime viewer's expectations, and for many, that's hard to swallow. One of the primary reasons School Days isn't for everyone is its shocking and brutal depiction of relationships. It takes a genre, high school romance, and completely turns it on its head, offering no hope, no redemption, and no fairy tale ending. For many anime fans, this is a major letdown. The anime is unapologetically dark and unrelenting, and it leaves little room for hope. While some viewers might appreciate its raw portrayal of emotional devastation, others find the lack of closure and the characters' emotional journeys to be deeply unsatisfying. Let's be clear, School Days does not offer a sense of catharsis. Many romance anime offer moments of emotional release where characters confront their feelings, make amends, and either walk off into the sunset together or part on amicable terms. School Days takes the opposite approach, showing us that sometimes love doesn't come with a happy ending. The characters don't get their closure, they are left to confront the harsh reality of their actions, which leads to violence, emotional breakdowns, and irreversible consequences. For viewers who expect the usual romance arc, this stark contrast can be jarring and hard to accept. Then there's the controversy surrounding the characters. While some viewers find Makoto's actions infuriating, others might view him as a representation of the flaws many people have when navigating relationships, selfishness, indecision, and emotional neglect. But for many, Makoto is simply an unlikable protagonist. His actions throughout the series are often reprehensible, and he continuously fails to take responsibility for the emotional devastation he causes. His selfishness, combined with his constant string of lies and betrayals, makes him a hard character to sympathize with. For viewers who are used to rooting for the protagonist, watching someone so morally detached can be frustrating and difficult to stomach. And then there's Kotonoha, who, while a sympathetic character, becomes deeply obsessive and unstable as the series goes on. Some viewers might find her gradual descent into emotional chaos tragic and heartbreaking, while others might see her as a character who is too passive and emotionally dependent. The way Kotonoha clings to Makoto, despite his obvious disregard for her feelings, can be difficult to watch. Her obsession with him becomes toxic, and for some, this makes her character less relatable and more frustrating. Her actions, while understandable in context, might come off as melodramatic or even irritating, especially to those who don't fully understand her motivations. Then there's Sekai, a character who starts out with good intentions but quickly becomes entangled in a web of manipulation and emotional selfishness. Sekai's behaviour can be seen as both empowering and deeply toxic. She is unapologetically selfish, and her emotional instability drives much of the conflict in the series. Some viewers appreciate how Sekai's character represents the dangers of letting emotions dictate one's actions, while others feel that she's just another manipulative, morally grey character who contributes to the show's negativity. Sekai doesn't hold back when it comes to pursuing what she wants, and this ruthlessness makes her one of the more divisive characters in the series. Another aspect that makes School Days difficult for many to engage with is the level of violence and the shocking nature of the finale. Without giving away spoilers, the final act of the series is violent and disturbing, unlike anything seen in most romance anime. While some viewers might find the brutality to be a fitting consequence for the character's actions, others see it as over-the-top and gratuitous. The violence in School Days isn't just physical, it's emotional and psychological. The finale serves as the culmination of everything that's gone wrong in the relationships, but the way it plays out can be deeply unsettling, especially for viewers who expect a more nuanced resolution. Let's face it, School Days doesn't fit neatly into the conventions of the romance or drama genres. It breaks almost every rule, and this is why it doesn't resonate with everyone. For viewers accustomed to seeing relationships in anime depicted with a clear resolution, whether that's a happy ending, a bittersweet goodbye, or a lesson learned, School Days is not going to provide that comfort. Instead, it leaves you with a sense of emotional unease. The characters don't get their happy endings. They don't grow or evolve in ways that make their actions feel justified. They simply spiral, and by the end, there is no returning from the destruction they've wrought. And perhaps one of the reasons School Days isn't for everyone is the emotional toll it takes. The show is emotionally exhausting, and watching it can feel like being dragged through an emotional wringer. For many viewers, this might be too much to handle. School Days doesn't give the audience any emotional respite. It's relentless, it's harsh, and it asks you to witness the complete breakdown of human relationships without offering any comfort or redemption. Some people want to watch anime to escape reality or to experience stories that provide emotional satisfaction. School Days doesn't offer that. Rather, it asks us to confront the raw, uncomfortable aspects of human behaviour, and that's not something everyone is ready to engage with. For those who can handle its themes of obsession, betrayal, and emotional destruction, School Days offers a powerful and often disturbing experience. But for many, the anime is just too much to stomach. Its portrayal of toxic relationships and the emotional wreckage left behind can feel overwhelming and even nihilistic. If you're looking for something lighter, more hopeful, or more emotionally rewarding, School Days will likely leave you feeling unsatisfied or even disillusioned with the genre. School Days is an anime that forces you to confront the darkest aspects of relationships, the lies, the manipulation, the obsession, and its lack of resolution or redemption makes it a tough pill to swallow. It doesn't cater to the viewer who wants a neatly wrapped up story or an emotionally satisfying conclusion. Instead, it challenges the conventions of anime storytelling and leaves the audience with something much more profound, and perhaps much more uncomfortable. That's what makes it such a polarizing show. It's bold, it's raw, and it doesn't care if you like it. School Days is a polarizing series that leaves an indelible mark on anyone who watches it. From its seemingly innocent beginnings to its shocking, violent conclusion, the anime takes viewers on an emotional roller coaster unlike any other. It flips the conventions of the high school romance genre, turning what should have been a simple love triangle into a harrowing exploration of obsession, manipulation, and the devastating consequences of emotional negligence. The series demands that we confront the messy, uncomfortable realities of human relationships, rather than offering the comfort of a tidy narrative with predictable outcomes. What makes School Days stand out in the crowded world of romance anime is its commitment to pushing the boundaries of what we expect from stories about love and heartbreak. Unlike many other romantic dramas, which typically offer clear resolutions, where the characters learn a lesson, grow emotionally, and find some form of closure, School Days refuses to provide that. It forces its characters and its audience to sit in the uncomfortable aftermath of their actions. There's no redemption for Makoto, no healing for Sekai or Kotonoha. The narrative strips away the illusion that love can always be redemptive or healing. Instead, it shows us the ugliness of love when it becomes toxic, obsessive, and manipulative. The characters in School Days are not idealized, and their flaws are not romanticized. Makoto is not a charming protagonist to root for. Kotonoha is not the pure, perfect heroine whose love is unconditional, and Sekai is not the fiery, bold love interest who saves the day. These characters are deeply flawed, and their actions are driven by emotional selfishness, insecurity, and indecision. As viewers, we are forced to reckon with the idea that people, no matter how well-intentioned, can make devastating mistakes in relationships. And once those mistakes are made, there's no going back. The damage is done. This is the heart of School Days, the idea that love is not always redemptive, and that the emotional consequences of betrayal and neglect can be severe. Despite its often uncomfortable and shocking content, School Days is undeniably powerful in its depiction of the complexities of love. It presents love not as an idealized, perfect thing, but as something messy and at times destructive. It's a story about the dark side of human relationships, the consequences of obsession, manipulation, emotional dependence, and selfishness. And in doing so, it challenges us to think critically about the relationships we form in real life. It asks us, what happens when we fail to communicate openly? What happens when we act out of desire without considering the feelings of others? School Days is a reminder that our actions, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, can have a profound impact on those around us. For many, School Days serves as a warning about the dangers of living in a world governed by unchecked emotional desires. The emotional unravelling of its characters is both tragic and horrifying, yet it is a necessary part of the story. The shocking violence in the finale is not gratuitous. It's the inevitable culmination of the characters' inability to understand each other and their failure to take responsibility for their actions. The anime offers no comfort, no redemption, and no easy answers. Instead, it forces us to confront the ugliness of human emotions, and in doing so, it leaves us with a sense of unease that lingers long after the credits roll. Ultimately, School Days is not for everyone. It's an anime that requires a certain level of emotional maturity to appreciate, and its dark themes of obsession, manipulation, and betrayal can be too much for some viewers to handle. It's an emotionally taxing experience, one that doesn't provide the satisfaction of a happy ending or the comfort of closure. But that is also why it's so unforgettable. School Days is an anime that stays with you, forces you to think about its deeper meaning, and leaves you reflecting on the emotional cost of love. For those who are ready to confront the uncomfortable truths about relationships, it's a story that will stay with you for a long time. In the end, School Days is a tragic commentary on the fragility of human emotions and the consequences of failing to navigate love and relationships with honesty and respect. It is an anime that challenges our expectations, forces us to reckon with uncomfortable truths, and leaves us with an indelible sense of emotional unease. Whether you love it or hate it, School Days is undeniably impactful, and it remains one of the most thought-provoking and emotionally complex anime ever made.